I'm James Lane, and most unrestored classic cars have one thing in common: rust. Usually in the lower fenders, the lower quarter panels, and the floor pans. And this Bel Air wagon project is a prime example, which is why you should make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you can follow along with me. So one of the major projects of this entire build was repairing the main floor pan section. Everything was rusted pretty bad, and I really needed to replace everything from the floor, the braces, and the inner rockers. The easiest and best option for me was to buy a full floor pan section with the braces included. While it was not a cheap part, it definitely saved me money and time. One of the problems with using this full floor pan was I couldn't find any information where someone had actually installed one. So using what information I did have, I decided to tackle it, and I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. Here's the main floor section of the wagon that we need to get in, and I've had it in storage here on top of my frame. Now this is the actual replacement frame that's going to go back underneath the wagon. As you can see, I already have the drivetrain. I already have all the suspension and everything ready to go. But we need to get this piece in first. So I think I'm going to finally take this thing home with me today and see if I can get this thing shoehorned up underneath the car. It's all loaded up. Let's get it home. So now getting that center section of the floor pan in might be a little tricky. Now this is the under rear seat pan. It's just zip screwed in. We're going to need to remove that before we can get the pan in. What we're going to have to do is we're actually going to slide it across the top of this lip right here. We're going to slide it in. And we should have enough room to where we can slide the pan in right here and go at an angle and go right in. So the main floor section's in, and I already see a couple of issues that I'm gonna have to deal with here. So as you can see right here in the corner, this piece turns down. That's gonna need to be trimmed because it won't let me close up that gap, as you can see. And here on this corner, as you see, there's a lip, and that lip needs to be trimmed from about here over that way, and that way we can push this thing forward and close up the gap. But so far those are the only two issues that I see. So when I bought this one-piece floor pan, I really couldn't find any information on anybody that's installed one of these things all in one piece, or any videos or anything like that. So I want to explain to you exactly what I've done so far. This was a one-piece pan, had all the braces, had the rear seat pan, all the braces. It was attached, and it come with the inner rockers, and they were attached. I needed everything that this floor pan came with, and it all came in one piece. So the company that I bought this thing from, which is a major Impala parts supplier, they told me, they said, yes, you can put it in one piece. But they told me that I needed to remove the under seat pan in the rear, which I did. And they told me you would have to slide it from the back here, and slide it in. I took some measurements and stuff, and I figured out it'd be a lot easier if I just took the inner rockers, took those off both sides. So unspot welded those and put those in. Now he said this was the hardest part, and I could just only imagine if you did this with the inner rockers on there. I think it was a lot easier just to separate it and do it the way I did it. Your under seat pan here, this actually tucks back under this middle floor section. So I'm going to put that panel back in. I'm going to test fit everything and zip screw it all down before I do any kind of final welding. I need to do some treatment on some of these areas. And you know, I'm gonna have to mark my holes and stuff from my plug welds and everything. So I just wanted to kind of go over that with you guys because, like I said, I couldn't find any information out there, and I know some of you guys might be kind of curious on actually how I got to this point that we're at. Well, as you can see, I dropped the floor pan back out of the car, and I'm dressing up these welds along these inner rockers with the flat wheel down there, as you can see. And I've got this side pretty much complete. Now I just need to move over here and do this side. Now that all the spot welds are ground down, it's time to test fit this pan again. So the pan's in. I've done some final fitting, some tweaking, and I got this thing zip screwed in, and I've marked all my holes. Most of my holes are already here to where I do my plug welds. but I had to mark some across the back there. And now what I'm going to have to do is there's a few areas like up there in the corner that I'm going to have to do a little bit of work to, but I'm going to take this pan back out. I'm going to treat some of these areas in the seams, down the inside of the inner rockers, treat the areas we're not going to weld to, and drill those holes, drill all these holes that I've got marked, and then we should be able to put this thing back in and get it ready to weld in for the final time. So as far as fitment on this panel, it actually fits pretty good. It's not 100% like it was from the factory, but that's to be expected because this is an aftermarket part. But I did have to do a little bit of tweaking in the areas like I pointed to over there in the corners. Those were not correct. But overall, this is going to work out just fine. Now here in the rear pan, I need to go ahead and add my seat brackets. Now this being a wagon, it has a folding seat. So you actually have a bracket that welds to the floor pan here and on the other side. And that holds the bottom of the seat where the hinge is. And you've got these clips here that need to be welded on. Now these are pretty easy to locate, but to locate these brackets, they go underneath here. I'm going to need to get my rear seat and sit it back in here and mark where my holes are and make sure this thing's going to fit nice and square and straight before I move any further. So these are the brackets for the rear seat. This spot weld to the bottom of the rear seat pan. And as you can see, these things were a little crusty and I've done some work to them. I'm going to media blast these things and get them cleaned up a little bit better than what they are. But this is another one of those items that they don't reproduce. You can't buy them, so you have to use what you have, or you have to find some good ones off of a donor car. And you know, with these repairs, these things will be just fine. So as you can see, I got the rear seat in. It's located in the correct spot, and this is very important to do this. The brackets, they come off the other pan. I had to locate them. I had to take a lot of time taking measurements, going back and forth, bolting this thing down, trying to get it in the right position so it would be exactly where it needs to be. It's very important that you do that, because if you don't, the seat could bind when you try to fold it. The part in the back that connects to the seat that creates the cargo area, that could not align correctly, and that could cause you problems. So you definitely want to make sure you get something like this squared away before you take it any further. Now here's the rear under seat pan, and as you can see, this thing's ready to go in. I've got the seat brackets, they're welded in on both sides, and I've got all the nuts welded in for the seat belts. All the holes are drilled for the plug welds, and everything turned out pretty good. So I need to do some work to that front floor pan section, because once we get this floor pan section in, this goes in first, it's going to be really hard to get access, or maybe even impossible to get to some of those areas that I need to address in the front pan. So I'm going to do that before I get this in. So one of the things that I needed to address with this front floor pan section was the spot weld holes. Now as you can see, I've already kind of touched these things up. They got some of the spot welds in the wrong spot, and what was happening was when this panel overlapped either the inner rocker or the rear floor pan section under the seat, there was actually a gap there in between the weld and the panel, and I want to go ahead and close that up before we get it on the car. So I'm going to show you a neat little trick if you ever need to do any kind of plug welding. This right here. Now this thing in the vice grip, this is a 3/4 inch copper plug for copper piping like you would use in your house, and these are available at your home improvement store, and they are about $1.50. So how this thing works is you take it and you put it underneath your hole and you start welding, and you can actually fill that hole up and that copper won't stick to the steel. So that's a neat little trick I figured I'd share with you. I know you can buy the plug weld pliers. This is a little cheaper option, and it works great if you can use both of your hands. So here's the final mock-up. The next step is to zip screw this thing down and to weld it in. Well, I skipped a step, and here's the rear pan. It's all welded in all the spots that it needs to be welded. Now there's a couple areas like over there in the corners. I need to address some issues there before I weld in there. But basically this thing is ready for the front pan to be welded in. And you can see here where the brace under the rear seat pan, you can see how nice and tight it is up against that inner rocker. That's the way you want it to be on both sides. No gaps. So looks like it's going to turn out pretty good. I'm going to have to do some rust treatment here after the fact. After I get all these panels in, I'm going to seam seal all this really good. I'm probably going to seam seal underneath here This thing did not have seam sealer from the factory underneath, but I believe I'm going to try to touch up some of these areas that'll keep any of the moisture out. So the floor pan's all nice and welded in now, top to bottom, front to back. And the next step is I'm going to scuff these areas where I did all this welding. And I'm going to lay down some epoxy primer. That'll keep these spot welds and everything from rusting up. And then on top of that, I'm going to go on top with urethane primer. And I'm going to let that dry for a few days. And then I'm going to come out here and I'm going to go across all these areas with seam sealer. So along with seam sealing up here at the top, I'm going to seam seal some areas on the bottom. This thing didn't have any seam sealer from the bottom from the factory, and that'll kind of help things, you know, not to rust in the future. So I'm going to do that as a precaution, and I'm going to actually seam seal on the outside of this pinch weld on the firewall, which it did not have any seam sealer on it from the factory. So that's what I'm going to do next after I tackle this primer job. I want to say thank you for watching. Check out all my other videos on my other projects. If you're not subscribed, make sure you click the subscribe button, click the bell so you'll get the notifications, and you can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram.